Just kiss it as you talk.
Yeah. We thought by way of introduction we should perhaps explain how we came to be in the original event. We were both living in Sale in Victoria, down just past the Latrobe Valley. I was a physiotherapist at the time. Mel worked for the Air Force and happened to be a patient of mine. And we were discussing rallying one day. I was rallying a little Renault 8 Gordini. I think Mel had a very advanced Tirana. And I don't know that we call it an XU1, do we?
XU2 for this exercise.
Yeah. XU202.
Yes.
And we had another mutual friend who owned a service station. We were standing there one day and they said, "Did you hear about this incredible event coming up around Australia, the Repco Reliability Trials going all the way around Australia? What an unbelievable rally that would be." And we said, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic." And I said, "Oh, my little Renault 8 would never make that. That'd be impossible. Too much work to even build it up to that level." And 6 weeks prior to that, I had bought a yellow Renault Virage, which was sitting on the tarmac at the time at the service station. And they all turned around and said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And I said, "It's a 1.4 engine, it's front wheel drive, exceptionally underpowered, it would cost too much and it's my road car." 6 months later we stripped it, put a roll cage in it, and it was a dedicated rally car for the next umpteen years. Until about 6 weeks ago, I caught up with the eventual owner of that car, and he said, "Oh mate, I have never seen a car rust out so badly. I took it to the tip only last year." So I said, "What did you do with the roll cage?" "Well, I didn't even think about that. I threw that away too." So that's that little bit of history. So anyway, we built the car ready to go, and 40 years ago we started out. In this event, some of you may have heard the story that day 3 up in Parakilna Gorge, up in the Flinders Ranges, we did a light switch, or had a problem with an electrical fire under the dashboard. We thought it must have been a bushfire coming because there was just smoke inside the car. That tired even by that stage that, "Where's that smoke coming from? Oh, it looks like it could be under the dash. Oh, maybe we'd better have a look." And then the lights went, so Mel, being the wizard electrician that he was, fixed that fairly quickly. Spent an hour and a half then working out how it happened, so I've had to put up with that all the way. Then across the Nullarbor, we had an issue with, or another breakdown issue with some electronic ignition, and we had a service crew that were following us around, some friends in a hired XD Falcon wagon that had 26 kilometres on the clock when we picked it up. We took it back a fortnight later with 14,500 k's on it. And they were meant to be following us and being at the service points. And across the Nullarbor, they had stopped to help us. We jumped back in the car, drove off. We were refuelling at Cocklepitty, wondering where on earth they'd got to, when another car pulled in, and one of our service crew guys jumped out and said, "Have you got our keys?" And we looked under the bonnet, and they were still there. So he then had to go back and get that car. In the meantime, we headed for Perth. We had some clutch issues, and I won't go into the details of that story, but we had to take the gearbox out in Perth. Is this ringing any bells? So everything was going exactly according to plan in this event again. 40 years to the day we were doing those same things. So that's where you probably know the rest of the story, so I'll leave it to Mel for a few thoughts.
There were, in a lot of ways, there were probably 2 events that happened. We were just talking to Barry after you finished talking. The dealer teams and the big teams were very, very well organised, so they had a phenomenal structure to help the vehicles get through. You decided to drive the vehicles, but they were had a lot of structure, usually three-person crews. We were doing it 2 up, and so even on the first night, even though we'd both been pretty keen ralliers, it was becoming patently obvious this was going to be a very long drive. The thing that probably made a heck of a difference for us, even though we had a very underpowered car in a lot of ways, it's a bit like the Commodore story that Barry just shared. It was an under-stressed vehicle in a lot of ways. It didn't have a thumping big roaring engine, it had a little engine. It was a fairly light car. And in the first couple of days, we moved up the rankings quite dramatically in that there were people getting stuck on sand dunes and in mud, and the Renault would just go over the top of it. And on one big sand dune out of Renmark, we come round onto it, and there must have been 40 sets of taillights up this gully where they were all stuck on a sand dune. And Greg jumped out, he was nabbing, he jumped out and started running through the bush finding the winch cables, and we just literally drove around, I don't know how many cars that night, just picked him up because the Renault could just dance through the scrub. In the border track from out of Mount Gambier was extraordinarily wet. You've all seen photos and heard the horror story of the transport stage into Mount Gambier that buried the whole blinking field. Well, coming out of Mount Gambier, heading north towards Renmark, we had this massive rain front had come through, and that sand had turned to mud, like goo. And we formed a really strong collegiate group in the back end of the field. If one went down, 3 cars would stop, and we carried each other through. And there were people even then that would not stop and help, and so when they bogged, we drove past them. We thought that was only fair. But again, the Renault never got stuck. We were able to stay afloat, as it were, and well, like Murray Carter. You all know, most of you know Murray Carter, the race driver refuge. At the end of the event, we presented Murray with our shovel, because Murray's Ford was the most boggable car in Australia. We spent a lot of time digging Murray out of places, so we gave him our shovel at the end of the day because we didn't think we needed any more. Over to you, Greg.
Those of you that have spoken to Mel will probably realise that he has a photographic memory for lots of things that happened, and he actually wrote a story afterwards when he was talking to some Rotary or Probus or something, and I read it and I thought, I wonder what event he was in, because he's got a photographic memory. I think I operate in a dark room. Anyway, in Perth, when we changed the clutch, we were fortunate enough to have the help of the Air Force, who had, as anybody's listening to tax money at work, had flown our tyres to various parts of the country. We were able to take Mel's wife up to Townsville to meet us at one stage. But after finishing the clutch, Mel was getting out from under the car and hit his head in Perth and got concussion. So I drove and navigated for the next 24 hours non-stop, and neither of us know how we did that or remember it. So then when we were up north, the story that Todd alluded to, we'd been driving thinking, we're just getting tired. There must have been some hallucination going on when you start accelerating for the kangaroos and braking for the tufts of spinifex. And so we decided we should have a break. So we stopped, we think, to have a sleep. The next thing we know, where's the next control? Oh, it's just down the road. We've covered 80 Ks and we don't remember a thing, even how we got to that point or where we drove, the fact we'd even changed drivers. This is scary. We pulled off the road and had another snooze. So that was the battle we had across that the top end, some of which you'll see tomorrow. Part of going across the Savannah Way, certainly from Mount Isa towards Cairns, was little creek crossings where the road was obviously unmade, and we'd be out winching the cars. You sort of got one eye out hoping there's no crocodiles around while you winch the car through with just a hand winch. So I'm sure the Holden dealer team boys didn't have that problem. Is that right, Barry?
Truly, no problem. It was a very uneventful event for us as drivers.
Yep. Mel?
A question's been asked us of quite a few times, and I think Todd alluded to it before. There were a number of crews got as far as here and said, stick it in your ear, and went home. People have often asked us, how the heck did you get on? How many fights did you have in the car, just being two of us? And I can say, hand on heart, there were 2 crosswords in 2 weeks, and they were both my fault. One was I felt Greg was going too hard, and I said, slow down. And he says, I'm okay. I went, sorry mate. And the other one was very similar. We just got on really well. We worked very closely, and so we can understand there could be tension in the crew, but we actually got on really well, and people find that hard to believe. But 40 years later, we haven't had a crossword in the car this time either. I mean, he drives terribly, but don't worry about that. Just one other aspect of it, I suppose, is that the dealer teams, and Barry would happily tell you, I suppose, that at each of the major stage ends, there were rest breaks. And those at the front of the field were getting good rests. But those of us at the back of the field often came in, changed your mind and got back in the car, because that's all the time you actually had. And I remember coming into Darwin, and they actually extended the rest break in Darwin by 2 hours. We didn't realise it was in deference to the 2 guys that had been killed on the Gibb River Road, but they decided we needed more sleep, so they said, we've extended by 2 hours, and we went, woohoo! They said, you're due out in 5. So we went, okay, we'll go and get showered. So at the back end of the field, there was a lot of very short changeovers or no stops at all. We worked out in the 2 weeks we'd actually laid down for 19 hours. The rest would have been sitting up in the car and driving. So it was, in some ways, 2 different events. Most exciting thing I've ever done in my life. I learned so much about myself in that 2 weeks. We knocked out a couple of big K days to get here in the Phoenix. Just as perspective, in the original event, we actually went round Australia in 13 days because the last day was a staged finish into Melbourne, 300k transport down the highway. If you divide the distance by the time, we did 1,500 kilometres every day, day in, day out, whether you were stopped or going, you had to make those distances. It was dangerous in a lot of ways, but it was just a magic thing to learn about yourself, and that's what I think I took most of it out. I learned so much about me out of it.
And the other thing that we have learnt, obviously again on this trip, is the only things that failed on the Renault were things that we added to it. Same problem again. Anyway, for those that haven't caught up with that, the problems that we had a clicking sound coming across the Nullarbor. We thought it was a CV joint going, so we were making some plans to get another one or another drive shaft in Perth anyway. And then all of a sudden it... I knew he'd remember, I was just testing. At Majura Pass, all of a sudden we did a driver change up the top near the lookout there, just turned around to go back onto the highway, bang, and we just immediately thought it sounded like a whole gearbox had let go. It was such a bad noise, no drive, great puff of smoke coming from underneath, and that was the end of our event, we thought. So we were very fortunate that we were trailered all the way, as you know, ending up in Perth, where the word had got around on a website called Aussie Frogs, which is the experts in all things French. Oh yes, it'll be this, it'll be that, and information was coming in from all over the world. Oh, you can't break drive shafts and those things. No, you can't break gearboxes. Well, I'm sorry, we have. So it goes straight into a workshop on Saturday afternoon in Perth, and the guy had the gearbox sitting there, and without even looking at anything else, we just assumed it was a gearbox. We were under it Saturday afternoon, starting to jack it up, pull the gearbox out. The next one was being prepped, ready to go in. And in the process of doing that, I said, what's this big rubber boot here with grease and that hanging out the side on the right-hand side, which is the opposite to where we thought the problem was? Oh, broken drive shaft. So that got replaced as well, but we also did the gearbox. So it all got patched up, and those of you at the same caravan park as us, we were back there Sunday night. So we used up our rest day. We think we spent 14 hours that day finishing it off, putting the gearbox in. We happily then drove to Geraldton, pulled into Geraldton, missed the turn, nothing wrong with the instructions, of course, we just turned the wrong way. And put our foot on the clutch, started off again, bang, another one goes. This is becoming both expensive, annoying and frustrating. So we had another wizard from the Aussie Frogs network who came down. He worked just up the street, and he was the one that actually Todd had got someone to get onto to get the gearbox in the first place. He came down, yeah, no, that sounds like a hub. Okay, so we had to trailer it again, thanks to those guys. Just unbelievable service we've all had. Straight out to this guy's home, great big shed. Yep, we'll better replace this hub. All right, so we replaced the hub. And I said, but what about this broken drive shaft on the right-hand side that I didn't have a look at? Oh, okay, so we replaced that as well. Put it all together, so that was Tuesday night, then wasn't after you guys left. We drove it out in the street and went 500 metres and it went bang. This is just not right. So anyway, we towed it back to the garage again and we replaced that drive shaft yet again, put it all back together. And just as he was putting the last bit together, he goes, you know, I think that might be hitting the exhaust. And what was happening was the drive shaft was pivoting off a new exhaust we'd had put in, which was made a little bit bigger, had a big heat bandage around it to keep the heat off the rubber boot from the drive shaft, and it was apparently levering itself over it, and it just dislocated the CV joint. for those technically minded, because I didn't understand a word of it. And that was it. And so we then, the next day, after putting it all back together, we had to go down to an exhaust place, had that cut out and a section bent underneath it so it goes around a nice little curve. And here we are. So we left Geraldton 1:30 on Thursday afternoon, and we got here at 10:20 last night. So we're glad to be in the event, and thank you everybody for the support, and the welcome out the front last night was just spectacular. So thank you again.
So, we've probably said enough. If anyone's got any question, please ask it. But I don't think we're anything special. I think we're just people that just stuck with it, just like everyone else here that's having troubles. That's how you get through life, is just sticking to it, and that's what we did 40 years ago, and that's what we're trying to do now. If anyone's got any questions, we'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll shut up and go away. We're shutting up and going away.
Thank you.